Back to last week's Operation Shield and Arrow, this round of fighting was slightly different than previous ones. It was the second consecutive time that Israel focused on the less capable Islamic Jihad, whilst the more powerful Hamas sat on the sidelines, allowing the Iranian proxy to take a serious pounding from the Israeli Defense Forces. So what can we make of the latest round of violence in Gaza? Here is our interview with former head of the IDF's strategic planning, General Assaf Orion. Assaf Orion, thanks as always for joining us today.
Pleasure.
So, we've seen this week the end of another round of escalation with the Gaza Strip, this time, second time around, with the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Bottom lines?
The opening strike began by hitting 3 senior commanders simultaneously, and I believe that the government of Israel saw this as a sufficient achievement to restore deterrence and to reestablish the, let's say, rules of the game between us and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad.
And will it do so? Because the last round, which took place in August, held less than 9 months, and we came back to the same point. So looking at that, what's in it if within a few months we will have to go back to fight the Islamic Jihad?
You try to establish an equation in which further aggression against you is not worth the cost incurred after trying and being punished. And it doesn't change the basic situation between Israel and Gaza, the governance of Hamas, a terror movement over Gaza, its inspiration or its quest to dominate the Palestinian system as a whole, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad role as a spoiler organization under Iran with Iranian funding, arming, training, and political support. So it is not, in this sense, a shaping campaign. It's a small deterrence operation.
And one of its targets was to leave Hamas outside of the fighting. Israel succeeded in doing so, but is it logic? Because for years, we've looked at Hamas as the organization which is responsible for everything that happens in Gaza. It doesn't matter who shoots at us, Hamas is responsible. Currently, we left it with no responsibility.
I think we can show both lights and shadows in the current situation. Prior to this operation, we heard Hezbollah and Hamas and Islamic Jihad and Iran itself, Quds Force and the supreme leadership, all of them talking about the unity of the theaters and the unity of the resistance, and that any touch or any change in Jerusalem would meet a united response. We saw Palestinian Islamic Jihad fighting alone with no active role by anyone except some declarations. So on the positive side, it showed constraints and restraint by the other partners of the axis of resistance, as they call themselves, and they didn't come to Palestinian Islamic Jihad support. So Israel didn't need to face a multi-theater challenge attacked from several frontiers and so on. Second positive issue is that the volume of fighting and the intensity was commensurate to the weakness of this weak player, Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Hamas is a much larger organization with larger arsenal and with the ability to affect a much larger portions of Israel. So in Israel's own calculus, it chose the cheaper way to restore deterrence, hoping that the other organizations will watch, listen, and draw the lessons. Will it, is it a full guarantee that it will work? No, but the balance is always between the immensity of, or the intensity of the fighting, but also the economic benefits and the political situation afterwards. Right now, we might be in a more stable situation. Nothing lasts forever in Gaza. The general trend is deterioration because of the population size and Hamas choices which leads to deterioration of the economic whereabouts. But this is all temporary fixes, and I would say in the middle of a spectrum of bad options between maneuvering, occupying, and disarming the Gaza Strip, or trying to seek a political arrangement with Hamas, which for the time being doesn't seem within reach.
But there is a practical agreement with Hamas, obviously. It worked this week. They don't fight. We don't fight them. Workers come out to work from Gaza. Money gets in. Goods getting in. So that's a practical agreement.
It's a practical agreement, but not a final agreement. And as you correctly asked, we don't know how long it will last. If 2 days from now, in the Jerusalem Day flag parade, they decide that it's a terrible provocation against Al-Aqsa, or they come out with another fantasy for political reasons, they may decide to launch rockets, and we will be in another chapter once more.
So let's look at the bigger arena. You've mentioned before the multi-theater threat to Israel, starting from Iran, ending in Gaza. How likely is it to practically happen? Because we saw during the Ramadan Passover a hint to that, but there it stopped, and Israel went back. The Israeli domestic problems are a little bit released compared to what they were a month and 2 months ago. So is that threat over, or is it held aside, or are we in it practically?
I think we're in it. We need to look at the succession of incidents, starting from the attack launched by Hezbollah to Megiddo Junction. That's an explosive device attack in the heart of Israel, 70 kilometers from the border of Lebanon, launched cross-border fence by Hezbollah. Then Israel apparently responded by attacking Iranians in Syria. Another attack by Hamas from Gaza, Lebanon, and Syria after a skirmish in Temple Mount, in this convergence between Ramadan and Passover, and the recent attack and response of Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which we just concluded. So we see a series of several theaters, several players along the axis trying to challenge Israel. What don't we see? We don't see a synchronous, united command attack on Israel by multiple organizations at the same time from multiple frontiers. So we see a series of several theaters, several players along the axis trying to challenge Israel. What don't we see? We don't see a synchronous, united command attack on Israel by multiple organizations at the same time from multiple frontiers. What we do see in this unity of or multi-theater challenge is we see a graded or a phased challenge, once from here, then from there, then from another theater, but not the altogether now effect that everybody thinks about. We still need to look at their political efforts, their statements and propaganda efforts, the arming efforts, and the learning efforts. And surely behind the scenes, everybody drew their own lessons from every round of fighting. And we can also hear of a united operation room sitting in Beirut. We saw the commander of Quds Force meeting the Palestinian faction's leadership in Lebanon just prior to the rocket launches in April. We saw Palestinian Islamic Jihad leader meet the Iranian president in Damascus. So all evidence shows that the partnership is growing. Is it an operational unified command? Not yet.
We saw a string of agreements between Iran, our fiercest rival, and some states that became some kind of our friends. Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Syria being brought back to the Arab League, etc., etc. What's in it in general? Why so for the Saudis and others who see Iran as the big Satan for them? And how bad news is in it for Israel?
I would put these developments in context of two major vectors. One, I would say it's the aftershocks, it's the end of the aftershocks of the Arab Spring. So in a sense, when Syria went down into the war, it's now emerging out of the war from being a theater of contest between various regional and global powers. It is now emerging as, a solution of realpolitik and trying to bring them about into the Arab fold. So Iran may have a little less influence. On the Iranian part, I would say this is the regional response to the notion that America sees the Middle East as a lesser priority. Some of them think that America is leaving. America is not leaving, but America is, in some sense, absent without leaving. Its appetite for risk has receded. China is a higher priority for it. It is very busy with the Ukraine war and so on. So the Arab partners see Iran as a less constraint and see the proposition of possibly a nuclear Iran as something more probable. And they need to say, okay, if America is not guaranteeing our security, we need maybe to mitigate the risk in our own means.
But Israel was there to meet the security risk in some way or another in the past few years.
Somewhat, and I think we're still there. But when Saudi Arabia and UAE and others say, okay, how do we contend with the threat with Iran? They are saying, why not ameliorate the situation by redrawing diplomatic ties? I don't think they have illusions that Iran is now a friend, but it's now a less belligerent enemy on speaking terms. At the same time, in the Gulf and in the region in general, the UAE is a player that tries to play across the board to balance between U.S. guarantee and partnership, alliance almost, and China relations, economic infrastructure, and maybe even some military buds or indications of military presence. When Israelis arrived in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, we need to also to know that there are about 200,000 Iranians there doing business, and much of the Emirati business is Iranian business. So for the Gulf, it is less of a contradiction to do this and that together, as much as for China, it's not a contradiction of doing business between Iran, Saudi, and Israel, and eventually when the conditions are ripe, to allow some guarantee or umbrella for an Iranian-Saudi agreement. Not that China brought much to the table, but it was there to host and to mediate the final phase of this agreement.
So I want to sum up with something that you've mentioned, by the way, which is China. China's existence in the area is growing bigger and bigger. We saw it by mediating the agreement between Iran and Saudi Arabia. We see it by them entering to each and every gap that the Americans are leaving. What's their goal? What are they trying to achieve? Only business, military as well, international influence?
China was in the past described by one of my colleagues as in the Middle East as an economic heavyweight, a political lightweight, and a military featherweight. And this has not changed, but all weights are growing a bit. For China, the Middle East is first and foremost a source of critical energy resources. Second, it is a crossroads of many strategic naval and land lines of communication between the markets and the production, between the mines and the production. So on the way to Europe or on the way to Africa, the Middle East is still important until the Arctic path is opened. What we see is that China is happy to undermine America's alliances and America's reputation, so to speak, its international position. But unlike a common error, it doesn't move into every space that America evacuates. The main space that China won't shoulder is security guarantees. China does not provide security guarantee to any regional power, nor do you hear expectations from the Saudis or the Emiratis or the Iranians to have a security guarantee by China.
So why going to Beijing to broker a deal with the Iranians from the Saudis' point of view?
Because politically it was comfortable. It allowed to advance the relations with China, and at the same time to tell Washington, I'm here, I have other options, please pay attention to what I asked. And by the way, I'm Mohammed bin Salman, I'm the actual king of Saudi Arabia, you need to treat me as such. So much of it, I think, was poking America where it hurts and showing that Saudi Arabia is a middle power, is a regional power, and it needs to be contended with on respectable terms.
Assaf Orion, thanks as always for joining us today.
Thank you.